Hey, this is John from Alloy 211. Today's video is on the Sig P229 semi-automatic handgun. I wanted to do this video because it's kind of an interesting Sig Sauer handgun and, well, somewhat interesting. It's not that interesting, I guess. But I also have had this gun for a long time. It was the first centerfire handgun that I ever purchased. And one of the reasons I like to make these videos too, especially when it's a gun I've had for a while, is I can kind of attest to the quality of a gun, at least the quality of this particular one that I've had over the years. So maybe that's not saying anything about all of Sig Sauer's, guns in general, but it's saying something about at least this one in particular. Anyway, the Sig Sauer P229 was developed in the early 90s for the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge. It was also then used as the basis for the 357 Sig round, which is a nice feature of this gun, that if you get a 357 Sig barrel, you can just drop it in and use the same magazines and shoot 357 Sig out of this. And maybe that really kind of doesn't matter because 357 Sig isn't really used that much, but it is another interesting cartridge. So, which I don't have that barrel. I've always meant to get that barrel, but, I have other guns too, so sometimes things that you mean to do or you want to do, you don't. Anyway, the P229 is a compact version of the P226, similar to the P228, but it differentiates itself from the other two in that the early P228s and the P226 had a stamped sheet metal slide, whereas this used a milled stainless steel slide. The reason for that being is that being chambered in the 40 Smith & Wesson, which generates a much higher slide velocity than 9mm, in order to use that stamped sheet metal slide, you'd have to use such a stiff recoil spring it'd make operation difficult. Now this is a DA SA version. This particular gun was made in the early 90s. These grips are later. I bought these to replace the original grips. Came with factory Sig Light night sights, which don't really glow that well anymore, but they are probably 20 years old, so that's why they're really not designed to last much longer than that. It was the first gun that Sig produced at their Exeter, New Hampshire facility. In 1992 is when they started producing it. I believe it was 2 years later when they started producing the 357 Sig chambering of it. It's also available with the DAK trigger, the double action Kellerman, which is a double action only trigger, but it has two trigger reset points. So it's different. It's supposed to have a much lighter trigger pull than your traditional double action only firearms. And as you can see, it's got a nice wide trigger guard for gloved hands and such. I mean, it's a really pleasant gun to handle and shoot, and I've never needed to shoot it with gloves, but if you needed to, you could. It's a single action, double action. Hey, you can see that's pretty cool. And it's got the Sig, try to make so you can see it, the Sig decocker right there, like many other Sigs. It's a typical Sig. It's got the takedown lever, which I'll go ahead and take this down. Pull the slide to the back. Flip takedown lever down. Then release the slide. Pull the slide off of the front. Pretty simple disassembly. Like many other guns, it's not that difficult. Many other modified Browning actions, it's not that difficult to disassemble. Easier than some, though. So, go ahead and pull the recoil spring and guide rod out, which this is a nice recoil spring. These twisted wire designs are really durable and good. And barrel, as you can see, it's got some wear. I've put some rounds through it over the years. But overall, it's in good shape. And it's been a pretty good firearm overall throughout the years. It's accurate. I like the way it handles. And so some people would say, oh, well, 40, and it goes back together just pretty much the same as it came apart. But people say 40 is a dead cartridge or dying cartridge and blah blah blah, which is kind of true to a certain extent, but in the same stroke, it's still a viable cartridge. It's still a good cartridge. And now 10mm is coming back in a big way too, so that's kind of cool. The one thing I will say, because some people will say, well, 40 is just a cut down 10mm, which it is. I mean, that is how it was developed and why it was designed. But there's another reason. A lot of people say it's just because of recoil and shooters not enjoying the recoil and blah, 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 blah. And that's true, especially for people who don't shoot a lot. But I found that for the most part, unless it's some ridiculous, very extreme recoil of a handgun, most recoil can be learned to be managed or mitigated somehow. So that's really, I don't think, as big of an issue with 10mm as a service cartridge as even just the wear on the guns. Because, as I said, they went from a stamped steel slide to a milled slide because of the increased slide velocity. Now 10mm is quite a bit faster than a 40. And you have to think, in a service arm, over time, that's really going to put a lot of extra wear on the firearm. And a gun in that situation is expected to function through tens of thousands of rounds before it even needs to have, say, springs replaced. Whereas if you have all this extra force over time, it's really going to wear on all the parts, not just your springs and such. It's going to wear on the frame, the slide itself. I mean, it's really not ideal to have such a high-powered cartridge in a gun you expect such a life out of. At least that's my opinion on it. Anyway, still in production now. It weighs 1.1 or 1.91 pounds. Its overall length is about 7 1/8 inches, and it's got a 3 7/8 inch barrel. And I find this gun to be very accurate, at least as accurate, if not more accurate, than I am. That's a good way to put it, I think. And it is a double stack magazine with a standard 12 round capacity, which that is standard capacity. But it is a little wide, but it's not blocky like the Glock. Although if you've watched my P2 or my G26 video, you'll see I do carry a Glock 26, and I have learned to really appreciate that. But this gun is, I would say, more comfortable to handle and to shoot in many ways than the 26, even though the 26 is 9mm and this is 40, which does have more recoil. But functionally, I mean, it functions like any other standard semi-automatic modern pistol. You've got your mag release here, decocker, slide lock, hammer, trigger. I didn't hit my finger. Anyway, like I said, it's your standard semi-automatic handgun. But I do think that they're a fine handgun, and if you find them on the used market, I'd definitely buy them. The MSRPs that Sig list on their website, I find to be a little, they're way high, honestly, for this gun. I do really like it, but I would never pay anywhere near $1,000 for it. When I bought it, I think I paid about $545, which seemed like a lot to me, and this was, like over, what was it, 16, 17, like 17 years ago. So, that was a lot, I thought, 17 years ago, and I really like this gun, and it's a good gun, but I would never pay nearly $1,000 for it, I'll say that. Anyway, wasn't, I guess, probably the most informative video. Just kind of a little talk about the gun and show it and to see what or to just, explain what I find to be good about it. It is a great shooter. I've put a few thousand rounds through it and I've not really had any problems. You can get the newer ones. They introduced rail dust cover, I believe is around 2005. I kind of had a hard time tracking down when exactly it was introduced. But you can get it now with rail for a light on the dust cover. Like, again, most modern semi-automatic handguns, you can find that on. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it informative. And if not informative, you at least enjoyed it for, I don't know, some reason. Thanks, and If you liked it, hit the like button, and if you watch my other videos and you enjoy those too, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Thanks. Have a good day.